It was the photograph that did it. I mean, how are you supposed to react when someone shows you an image, a bona fide photographic image, of a thing that should not exist? The creature was hunched, crouched in the corner of a small stone yard. It glared up at the camera with eyes of a sandy, putrid yellow that nevertheless burned with both awareness and savagery. The jaws, so much larger than those of a dog, were differently formed, the open mouth showing that the teeth were thicker and more curved, the back teeth, the molars, far more developed, designed, it seemed, for the crushing of bone. Most striking of all, however, were the malformations. The way the head of this thing, rather than sloping backward into the neck, was domed and curved back on itself, like a human skull, and dropped vertically into the broad but muscular shoulders of a man. It was not a beast, and it was not a man, but it was there, and it was real. It was, in short, a nightmare, caught and recorded on film. Seeing the photo, dragged with scimitar talons all those memories back to the surface. Those nights as a child when I would lay in bed listening to the sounds outside my room, imagining a thing on back-curved limbs stalking ever closer. It brought back the stories my father had told me about the so-called Werewolf of Morton, of how the entire town had lived in fear of those awful howls echoing out above and across that stretch of moonlit moor. It brought back the stories he'd told when I was older, of how he had once gone up toward that moor to see the dogs and caught a glimpse of something, stalking between the trees that had no business walking upright on two legs like a man. How he would hug me hard and warn me to be careful any time I left the house after dark, and how he would say to be aware of both people and anything else that might be out there. I'd always known that he believed, but that didn't mean that I did. I always assumed he'd seen something, but that the something was nothing like what he thought it was. And yet, right there on the aged piece of celluloid was exactly what he had described, exactly the thing he'd always said he'd seen. It was not quite an animal, but nor was it man. It was, as he had always insisted, a monster. I'll admit that when I was first called to Rosewood Lodge that night, I wasn't expecting anything like what actually happened. The lodge is a sheltered accommodation facility, or as we used to call them back in the olden days, an old people's home. As police officers, we did have occasion to visit the place, but it's hardly like the people living there are going to be causing a riot, is it? 9 times out of 10 when we did get called up there, it was because the people in there or the building itself was the victim. You know what I mean? Some little idiots have graffitied the outside wall or thrown eggs at a window after one of the residents told them to bugger off. Every now and again we would go up there when the crime wasn't even real, just to reassure people. We'd get a call from the warden saying that one of the women is having an episode and is convinced someone is stealing her milk despite the fact that the milk is being provided by the management. We'd go up and make a show saying that we would track down the dreaded dairy criminal and basically just humour and reassure the residents so that they felt calmer and more secure. That was what I expected when I went up there that night. It was far from what I got. If I'm honest, when I actually arrived at the home, I had literally no idea what I was going there for. I'd been told over the intercom from the dispatch that the warden had called and needed me to go up there, but I hadn't really been paying attention. As soon as I heard the words Rosewood Lodge, I just kinda zoned out and focused all my attention on the burger I was eating at the time. It was only when I got there and saw the warden's ashen-looking face that I realised there was actually something seriously wrong. In short, the story was simple. A woman named Dorothy, or Dot for short, had decided after decades of sitting on the information that today was the day she should confess to having killed her husband 50 or 60 years earlier. Now, obviously, I should have taken the confession seriously from the start, but when someone attaches that kind of confession to the word werewolf, you naturally treat what they're saying with more than a pinch of salt. I took it with shovel loads. Having been led into the main community room to meet Dot, tiny and ancient sitting in an armchair that looked even older than she was, I reasoned that much of what she was saying was likely to be the result of some form of dementia. "Hiya Dot, how are you doing?" I said in that slow, sing-song voice people reserve for old people and children. "I'm Inspector Paul. I've come to talk about some silly things you said earlier. Do you remember what you said?" Dot looked at me and then at the warden who was creeping around behind me like he was half-heartedly trying to haunt me.
"Who's this plank?"
she asked bluntly.
"And why is he talking to me like I'm a 4-year-old with learning difficulties? I'm old, mate, not stupid. You don't need to patronise me. I got enough of that from Chuckles and friends here at the home. Unless, of course, it's actually you that's stupid and that's just the way you talk. It's not, is it?"
I admit I was somewhat taken aback by this. Whilst she may have looked as if she'd have been more at home in the Cretaceous period, Dot was not only sharp as a tack, but happy to stab people with the end of one. Fully in control of her faculties and clearly annoyed that I was encroaching upon her time.
"I know why you're here."
She added, pressing her lips together tightly in a way that communicated deep dissatisfaction with the situation.
"It's because I told this moron about my bill, isn't it? Well, you needn't have bothered coming up here for me. I spoke to a lawyer years ago, and he told me it was perfectly legal back in the 1970s to kill a domestic animal if it was in pain, and the whole thing was an act of mercy. Christ knows I've shot enough calves and lambs over the years that were born with defects. There's no case to answer, so there's no need for you to be here. You've got more pressing matters to attend to. You should be out there trying to stop it."
"But..."
The ghostly warden began to protest.
"You said that you'd killed your husband. That's what you told me. That's what she told me."
He insisted, glaring at me as if worried that he would be arrested for wasting police time. Dot sighed deeply.
"Yes, I did. But as I also told you, my bill was a werewolf at the time, so technically..."
Now it was Dot's turn to use the sing-song voice, speaking to the warden as if he was sucking on a dummy and wearing a diaper.
"Technically I killed an animal, so it's fine. It wasn't Bill again until a few days later."
I looked back at the warden and raised my eyebrows, trying to indicate silently that whilst Dot seemed quite on the ball had clearly deflated quite some time ago.
"I don't what you're looking at him for,"
Dot interjected.
"I'm the one who killed him. Sonny Jim here wasn't even born, so he can't help you. Anything you want to know, you're going to need to get from me."
I nodded that I understood and pulled up a chair beside her. Turning her head, she glared at me for several moments before continuing, as if sizing me up or assessing something about me before she chose to go on.
"You're a local lad, aren't you?"
She said finally, still looking me over as if she examining me or looking for clues that might be an imposter. I nodded, but I might as well not have bothered. Her observations had already confirmed her statement. Moving her glasses to the end of her nose, she looked again, narrowing her eyes, then smiled.
"I thought so. You're Jack Lambert's son, aren't you? Or if not his son, his nephew or something. You don't get that nose without being part of that family in one way or another."
I returned her smile and explained that Jack was my dad.
"I thought so,"
she said triumphantly.
"If he's your dad, then you'll already know that what I'm talking about is true. Or you should. He saw it and all. The werewolf, I mean. Still, it's the only word of mouth for him, I reckon. Just a scary story. There's no proof other than his words. Well, I'd like to say I trust people to believe me, but I don't. That's why I've got the proof."
Reaching into a pocket at the front of her dress, she produced a clutch of small coloured but badly washed out photographs.
"Here,"
she said.
"That's my Billy there, right before I shot him."
I took the photographs from her and examined each of them in turn, feeling as I did that tightening snap that struck the chest when the wrong nerve was pressed, when fear wraps its icy talons hard around your heart. It was a photograph, taken it seemed, in the backyard of some old terraced house. It was taken with at least some sunlight visible, perhaps as dawn approached, and it showed clear as day what appeared to be a werewolf. I coughed to clear my throat and try at the moment allowed to steady my voice before I spoke. That's quite the picture you have there, Dot. You say you killed this thing. Back in the 1970s?
"No,"
Dot snapped.
"I never said a thing. I said I killed my husband, my Billy. That was him, at least at that point, under all that, but I didn't call him a thing."
I didn't know what to say, but eventually found the words. "If that's true, I said. Then why tell us now? I mean, it's been decades, you've gotten away with it, why confess now? As if on cue, from somewhere outside, we heard the howl unfurl. It was the same hideous sound that had been reported across the town for weeks.
That?
Said Dot sternly.
That's why. It's happened before, and you need to stop it, before it happens again.